Bonjour, je me présente Nicolas Schulman, gestionnaire de portefeuille et conseiller en placement auprès de la financière Banque nationale. Vendredi le 3 octobre, nous avons décidé, mon équipe et moi, d'organiser une conférence économique sur la politique américaine et les enjeux qu'on pourrait vivre d'ici les prochaines élections. Nous avons eu comme conférencier M. Greg Vallières, stratège en chef sur la politique américaine de chez AGF, un partenaire d'affaires avec nous depuis plusieurs années. Nous avons touché plusieurs sujets, plusieurs thématiques et nous avons répondu à plusieurs de vos inquiétudes et de vos questions. Nous avons aussi décidé de partager la capsule et la conférence économique sur notre site Web. Et si jamais vous avez des questions ou des inquiétudes ou des préoccupations, n'hésitez pas à rentrer en communication avec moi ou un membre de mon équipe afin de bien répondre à vos questions. On vous souhaite aussi une très bonne écoute et une bonne journée.
It was like a train wreck, nothing to be proud of them. But I do think that there were a couple of big mistakes. One was that we won't forget this for a while. Donald Trump did not condemn white racists, white supremacists. Trump did not say that this is wrong. I think that was a big mistake. I think Biden forgot a couple of things. Biden, I thought, should have mentioned the fact that in all of these stories about Trump's taxes in the New York Times, the most significant thing was not that Trump paid no taxes. We all know he didn't pay taxes. It wasn't that crazy, illegitimate right that Trump's companies are losing a tremendous amount of money. The real story was that Trump owes someone $400 million. The New York Times made it clear that there's an enormous loan that Trump has to pay back. Most people, including myself, think that the money is owed to Russia. And Biden didn't mention it. I thought that was a big mistake by Biden not to say anything about it. But I would say that final point, the demeanor from Trump, arrogant, he was a bully. He didn't let anybody else talk. I think the demeanor was shocking to a lot of Americans. And I think that the polls will show in the next day or two that Biden has actually increased his lead. Whether this continues through the Trump illness remains to be seen. But what if Donald Trump gets through this in 10 days and says, oh, I'm fine. It wasn't that severe. I'm ready to go campaign again. Well, a lot of Americans might say, well, he's a tough guy. People might have sympathy for him. So it's possible that the virus could change things. But based on the debate, I still have to say that Joe Biden is the favorite to win the election.
Well, that was one of my questions. I've been in the business for the last 18 years as a portfolio manager and managing assets for our clients. And I was really curious to actually get your perception on just not only who won the debate and going forward, but what are the polls telling you right now? What is the spread right now of the lead that Biden has, and can he hold on to it?
Well, it's a very interesting question. There's two polls, there's two things to look at. The first is just the general public, the election across the country. That shows that Biden is ahead by maybe 6.5, 7 points. I'm not sure I believe the polls. The polls were wrong in 2016. They were wrong with Brexit. They were wrong with Boris Johnson. So I think the polls, you have to be cynical. What I look at, I tell everybody on calls like this, you have to look at a wonderful clearpolitics.com, my favorite website. Every morning they have an aggregation of every poll out there. So it's not just one poll, not just the Washington Post or the New York Times. It's all the polls. Again, it's realclearpolitics.com. And I look at that carefully, and I'm not even sure I believe that, but I do believe the trends. The trends are what I look for. And the trends right now, I suspect in the next day or two will be ahead by quite a bit. The other election, maybe the more important election, is the election for the states, because as I'm sure you all know, we have this crazy way of electing our presidents in the U.S. through the Electoral College, which each state gets a certain number of votes. The 5 states that will make all the difference on election day are Florida, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Those are the 4 states that Hillary Clinton just barely lost. Right now, Biden is ahead in every one of them. If Biden wins 3 of those states, I think he wins the White House. If he wins 4, it's very, very likely that he would win the White House. So those races are the ones that I look at every morning to see if there's any new polls. Those are very, very important factors.
So these are the 5 major swing states, as we often hear as a comment. They could make a big difference in this outcome for the elections on November 3rd.
Exactly. And we all know that Biden's going to win California. Biden's going to win New York. He's probably going to win Massachusetts. So you have to factor that out of the number that shows he's ahead by 6.5 points. When you take out California and New York, maybe the lead is only 2.5 points. Then it gets closer.
Okay.
So the swings, you're absolutely right. The swing states are crucial.
Coming from Florida, being dual citizen, I really hope that the Floridians will actually realize and wake up that they actually do have to vote for Biden and actually not vote for Trump. On a quick point also, you briefly talked about the taxes and his tax reports.
Yep.
How major is that towards Americans right now going through a major recession and a pullback? Will that actually, how good is this for Biden to actually bring onto the table his financial situation during this, really turmoil time that we're going through during the recession?
Well, it does Trump, but I must say I'm a cynic. I'm not a Republican. I'm a cynic. Being a cynic, I would have to say a lot of people will look at the New York Times and say, they put this article out in late September. I mean, that looks pretty cynical and suspicious that the New York Times is obviously trying to influence the election. So it may have some impact. Again, the biggest story is who does Donald Trump owe $400 million to? That's a story that the New York Times probably will have in the next week or so. The New York Times is saying they have more, and I do think there'll be more to come out on this.
So this is not fake news.
No, I believe it. But what makes me suspicious is the timing.
Okay, great. Another really major factor that's going on, and there's a lot of comments going on about this. How do you see the outlook of the Senate right now? I mean, they're going through a major transition, and they have, some major power behind them right now. And knowing that, depending on the outcome of Biden and Trump, there's a lot of senators that are probably actually, very scared for their own jobs right now. So how do you see the overlook of the Senate as we go forward?
It's a very important story for investors. I think in the financial markets, there's a concern that one party, the Democrats, could control everything. They'll keep the House, no question. Biden is favored in the White House, and in the Senate, where it's very close. If the Democrats take the Senate, that means you would not have divided government. And most investors in America would prefer to see divided government. I have a friend on Wall Street who calls me up every 2 years and says, Greg, don't forget, divided government is good because it means they do less harm. And there's some truth to that, in my opinion. So could the Senate go to the Democrats? Absolutely. Right now, it's 53 Republicans, 47 Democrats, which means Mitch McConnell and the Republicans have a very narrow margin. They've used this margin to block more liberal legislation coming over from the House. And if the Senate turned to the Democrats in this election, this liberal legislation, spending a lot of money, raising a lot of taxes, that legislation could make it through the Senate very easily if the Democrats take control. So this is a very big story for the markets.
Thank you, Greg. Another question that I had on that same topic, the Supreme Court. We know right now that's being actually revised, and we're actually submitting a new judge right now on the table. What would happen with the Supreme Court if the elections would be contested? So if, let's say in a worst case scenario that Trump actually comes in or he loses and it's contested, what would be the implication of the Supreme Court?
Well, the new judge who's going to be confirmed, in my opinion, by the end of October, would mean this 6 conservatives, 3 liberals. And if it is 6-3, the Supreme Court would make some very important decisions. They might have to decide on who actually won the election. Trump might go to the Supreme Court and say this was not a fair election because of mail-in ballots. Trump has said he might do that. So the Supreme Court could play a role there. The Supreme Court in the next few weeks is going to have a ruling on Obamacare. The Supreme Court, and that's a big issue for a lot of female voters, and the Supreme Court may rule in the next year or so on abortion. And an awful lot of women who were not excited about Biden, I think now are more excited to vote because they worry that Roe versus Wade and reproductive rights could be killed by the Supreme Court. So this Supreme Court, which is going to move much more to the right, is a very big part of the U.S. political climate.
And has the new judge, who has been actually just nominated for the moment, has she actually come down with any comments on where she sits on abortion?
She said a few years ago that she strongly opposes it. I'm quite convinced that during her congressional hearings that she say that she maintains an open mind. I think a lot of the Democrats won't believe it, but she'll say that she has an open mind. But I think if she's confirmed, and I think she will be, people who worry about the issue of abortion are going to become even more worried.
Thank you, Greg. Also, if we continue on that situation of what we're going through right now and the whole COVID situation and everybody actually being locked down once again here in Quebec, in Montreal downtown, we're going through major recessions, we're going through bailout projects, we're going through central banks actually just throwing cash at us right now. We're working on a second bailout right now in the United States. And it still hasn't been concluded. And that's why the markets are so anxious and don't really have a direction of where they're actually going to be pinpointed because they're working on a project right now. Now, do you see the project of this second bailout of this another liquidity coming to the system being approved? And if it is approved, will it help more the Democrats or the Republicans?
Well, several points very quickly I would make. First of all, I do think we need another stimulus bill. There are more and more anecdotes about people who are worried about evictions, worried about bankruptcy, worried about their finances. This problem, and especially for small businesses in the U.S., there is clearly a need for another stimulus bill. Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Fed, has made it clear that he wants a bill. Powell will do a lot. Powell is a major player. But I would say that right now, there's still a disagreement in Congress. Nancy Pelosi initially wanted an extra $3 trillion. That's a staggering amount of money. She's brought it down to about 1.7, 1.8 trillion. The White House has come up to maybe 1.6 trillion. They're close. Here's the problem. The problem is congressional Republicans, Mitch McConnell, and the Republicans are saying that's too much money. They already have seen in this year, the fiscal year in the U.S. ended 2 days ago. We're going to have a deficit of $3 trillion.
Crazy.
In this new year that just started, we'll have a deficit probably of $2 trillion. And by the middle of the decade, the U.S. will have debt of over $30 trillion. That's a lot of money. And I think that many Republicans are saying, no, we don't want to spend much more money. That said, I think if Biden wins, a pretty big stimulus right away, mostly all for middle class, small businesses. There might be some tax increases for wealthy people or corporations. But I do think with Biden, we'd get one. Even if Trump wins, I think in early 2021, it'll become clear that the economy, is not in recession, but that the economy is starting to weaken. So I do think we will get a stimulus. It's just a question of when.
And let's say they come to an agreement of a certain value of a stimulus package over the next couple of days before the elections. Which side would actually benefit better or more from that?
Well, the big benefit would be all the people who are out of work. But beyond that, yeah, that's obvious. But beyond that, I would say Trump could benefit. If the markets like this, the markets would rally if we got a big stimulus. It would increase optimism about the economy. I think that would actually be a positive story for Trump. And to be a cynic, once again, I would say that Nancy Pelosi has not been in any great rush. She's in no hurry because I think she knows that if they pass a bill, it would help Trump.
Well, that was one of my comments that I've had locally with other clients right now, is that the Democrats have no advantage right now to accept or to go quickly on this bill. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, who's getting hurt are all the people in the United States right now who are out of work during this recession, during this pullback. But the Democrats have no need in the short term to push to actually in favor of Trump. So, once again, at the end of the day, it's everybody else that's hurting from this situation. So thank you on that, Greg. Another point that I want to bring up as well is, as we move forward and we come to the conclusions that there may be a Biden camp or a Trump camp would win, how would the markets react? How would the markets react if Biden came into play with this number of debt that we have on our shoulders compared to Trump?
Well, I would say this. I talked to a lot of investors in the U.S. A surprising percentage of them really do not like Donald Trump. They don't like him at all. They like his policies. And I think a lot of people in the markets would be worried at the enormity of Joe Biden's tax increases. Biden wants to raise taxes on capital gains. He wants to raise estate taxes. He wants to raise business taxes. He wants to raise individual taxes. He wants a Wall Street transaction tax, a long, long list of tax increases that I think the markets would be concerned about. Also, there would be several sectors I mentioned earlier. I think fossil fuels would not like to see Biden win. The healthcare services, there are many in defense. I think there are many sectors that would be concerned if Biden won. Now, I have to be fair. I think that if Biden won, there would be some relief that we would stop all the war on tariffs. I mean, Donald Trump keeps saying, I'm a tariff guy. I want to raise tariffs on everybody. I think Biden would bring that to an end. I think Biden would be more stable, more predictable. And again, I think Biden would have a big stimulus package right away in the winter that the markets might like.
That was my thoughts as well, having this liquidity come into the system. How do you see the tensions between China and the United States going forward if Trump maintains its position compared to Biden?
It's one of the biggest impacts of COVID-19 because the level of antagonism, of antipathy is really strong between the U.S. and China, Canada and China, and the Western Europe and China, Australia and China. I think there's a widespread belief here in Washington, and not just Trump, it's the Democrats as well. Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Chuck Schumer. In both parties, there's a feeling that China has not behaved properly, that China was not transparent with the virus, that China concealed the extent of the virus. China treats their dissidents very poorly, as we all know, whether it's Muslims in Western China or people in Hong Kong. And China has been hacking into U.S. companies, especially hacking into U.S. companies that are working on the vaccine. So I think that the bad relations between the U.S. and China will continue. There's in Congress to reward companies, give companies a tax break if they bring jobs back to the U.S. Medical equipment, pharmaceuticals that are now made in China that we bring back to the U.S. So if Biden wins, maybe he would become more pragmatic on trade and China. But I think the relations between the U.S. and China will stay difficult for a while.
Thank you, Greg. One last question before we get into the Q&A, because I mentioned to everybody they want to keep this luncheon and this lunch and learn very short in time. How do you feel about Vice President Kamala Harris? How do you feel that Biden's choice to support him going forward, due to his age, due to the demographics as well? How do you feel that choice was made, and what do you think of it?
I think she's pretty competent. She's not a radical. The people on the left say she's too conservative. People on the right say she's too liberal. So she's a typical center-left Democrat. Also, as you know, a very interesting story for Canada, that
Yeah.
she went to high school in Montreal, and her mother, who is deceased from India, her mother taught at McGill. So Kamala Harris has a connection with your country. I would say that in several states, she might add half a point to Biden's total. States with big populations of African Americans, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia. I think she would help him. She's been pretty quiet. I think she'll stay out of the background. I think she doesn't want to make any big splash, and I think she was the most logical choice for Biden to make.
I'm anxious to see how that outcome is going to be next week between Pence and herself in front of, let's say, the next debate. Hopefully,
Yeah.
more communications will be able to be heard compared to last Tuesday. So
Yes.
we're hoping to hear their policies and their ideas compared to what we had as a real shit show last Tuesday.
Yes.
Excellent. So Achille, were you able to go through some of the questions of any Q&A or any questions that came in right now for Greg?
Yep. Je vais simplement répéter pour tes invités, Nicolas. Si vous avez des questions, n'hésitez pas. Dans le petit coin droite en bas, il y a la fonction chat et cliquez mon nom et vous pouvez m'envoyer les questions. So I'll start right away. Greg, there's a couple of questions that have come up related to this whole announcement this morning. And some are wondering, is this just another lie? Is this just another attempt to deflect attention by Trump and his camp?
Funny, we had the same discussions an hour ago about this news.
Yeah. Well, as you all know, I am cynical, but I'm not that cynical. I know I do think he has it. I mean, he's been so careless. He's been reckless. He goes around with no mask. He shakes everybody's hand. Frankly, I'm surprised he hasn't gotten it sooner.
Thank you. I'm not sure if he'll have any bleach or Clorox tonight as a drink to maybe clean his system out. As he's mentioned before, that could be a good idea.
Yes. Yep.
We have another question related to polls, and some polls this morning mentioning that Biden may be up by as much as 13 points. Are you aware of those? And if so, how do you feel about that?
I didn't see that one, but I've been on the phone all day, and I've been I haven't had time to look at today's polls, but I guess that Biden helped himself by 2 or 3 or 4 points in the debate, or let's put it this way: Trump hurt himself in the debate, and I wouldn't be surprised to see that at all. You know, another thing I should mention is that most Americans have already made up their minds. I would argue that 90% of Americans have already decided. And in fact, the voting has begun.
Absolutely.
Voting started in the last week or two. And I think that that's still another reason that I make Biden the favorite.
Greg, we have a couple of questions related to markets and some of the economic side of things. But there's one question that I absolutely have to ask because it's come up several times. What happens if Trump, because of COVID, becomes incapacitated? What are the next steps?
Would be the vice president, Mike Pence, and there would have to be a determination that the president really is incapacitated, and that would require his cabinet, Treasury Secretary, Secretary of State, everybody asserting to Congress that Trump no longer was able to serve. Congress then would vote, and I think if his own cabinet said he's not capable of serving, that would happen. But for now, let's say Trump is seriously ill, it would clearly go to Mike Pence. If Mike Pence got sick, the next in line, believe it or not, is Nancy Pelosi.
That would be magical. That would be magical if it happened.
Yes.
Wow, that's just incredible. Okay, so
how many times I say that I always feel that we're in a House of Cards episode right now over the last 4 years. So it's pretty dramatic what we're going through.
As we all say right now in Washington, You can't make this stuff up.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So maybe we should shift gear and look at some of the market and economic questions. One question, should we still value growth names over value names in the current context?
I must tell you, gentlemen, that is not my expertise. We have some fabulous people at AGF who are experts, starting with Kevin McCready. But there are many, many people at AGF who can talk to you about value versus growth. That's not an issue that I cover.
Thank you, Greg.
Fair enough. And Nick, we do have a couple of questions related to growth and value. We do have a question also with respect to, besides biopharma, like, what would the next top sectors be? I can provide all that info from our asset allocation committee separately once we wrap up, and you can forward that to your guests.
Absolutely.
There's a question, Greg, you touched on China-US relations. Do you feel that the US, depending on who wins, might start to ease away from importing Chinese goods?
Yes, I do. I think that, especially if Trump wins, I think there would be a very good chance that we would, as I said earlier, we would go to American companies and say, we will give you a subsidy, we will give you some tax break if you begin bringing jobs back to the United States from China. Pharmaceuticals, medical equipment. I do see a movement like that. It's not quite as strong among the Democrats, but even the Democrats, as I mentioned before, even Democrats like Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Chuck Schumer, all feel that we should be doing more to bring jobs back from China to the U.S.
Greg, on that point, before we go to the next one, I'm just going to add on to that. How do you feel the inverse? How would China react to American companies like Apple producing in China for American consumers? How would you see China reacting if that actually happened? Because if we start closing the borders to China,
Yep.
they're probably going to do the exact same thing to them.
It could become very, very nasty and contentious. If China feels they're being singled out by the U.S., I think China could look at some major U.S. companies. I won't name their names, but you know who they are. Major U.S. tech companies could face retaliation from China.
We just got something hot off the press, as I've been notified. Joe Biden and his wife have been tested negative right now. So
Good,
just to share
good.
that with our guest today.
Good.
Ashil?
Yep. Greg, a question with respect to the Supreme Court. Is there a disconnect between some of the names that have been nominated and the makeup of the Supreme Court and long-term threat or to the U.S. stability?
Well, no, I wouldn't say a threat to U.S. stability, but the court is now going to be unbalanced, or it will be an imbalance at the Supreme Court. Rarely have we seen 6-3, either 6 conservative or for that matter. So the Supreme Court is tilting quite a bit. This has been the major accomplishment for Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader. He's made it very clear that's his goal in life. What the French people say, you would say his raison d'etre. The raison d'etre for Mitch McConnell is to get more and more judges confirmed. He has now gotten over 200 federal judges confirmed. And I think these judges are not representative of the American public, way far to the right, but Mitch McConnell has been able to get this done. And it's his big accomplishment.
Greg, could Joe Biden reverse the nomination of Donald Trump right now for the Supreme Court?
No, the Senate. I don't think that's likely. I think that she will win. And if Biden wins the election, he would not be sworn in as president until January 20th of 2021 at 12 noon. And by then, I think this nominee will be already on the court.
Okay, thank you.
Je rappelle aux gens, si vous avez des questions, n'hésitez pas à me les envoyer à moi personnellement dans la fonction chat, Achille Ginocchio. Greg, there's a question related to markets, and someone is asking, the markets are down this morning. Is it because of the polls or because of the health issues with Trump?
Well, I'd add a third thing, and that was the unemployment number this morning was not great. It wasn't a terrible number, but it wasn't as good as expected. So that may have been a factor as well. I think some of it is disappointment that we still don't see Nancy Pelosi and the Republicans. Part of it was COVID, and I think part of it. Just add one other thing. There's been a real change in the last 24 hours in the polls favoring Biden. And one of the many, many things that I look at everything I can find, is the Las Vegas and the odds makers in Las Vegas are pretty good. They have a pretty good track record. And in just the last week, Biden has gone up by almost 10 points.
Wow.
This morning, if I'm not mistaken, the Las Vegas odds gave Biden a 65% chance of winning. That's the most I've seen in a long time.
So I guess Vegas is still working right now and still alive.
I guess, yep.
A couple more questions. What's your outlook? What are your thoughts on the upcoming vice presidential debate?
Well, I think it'll be more substantive. Kamala Harris can get, she's got a sharp needle. As we found out, she went right after Joe Biden at the beginning of the debates. It seems like 100 years ago, but it was about 8 or 9 months ago when the debate started. Kamala Harris went right after Biden, so she's tough. She's a very successful prosecutor, district attorney, and she knows how to handle herself in that environment. But as I mentioned earlier, I think Joe Biden, I think Mike Pence has a good experience as vice president. He was a member of the House of Representatives. He was a governor. I suspect this debate will be more about substance and less about.
Greg, someone is asking that there appears to be a disconnect between the markets and some of the realities that people are concerned about. In other words, the markets appear to like Trump's policies, but shouldn't people be concerned about some of the chaos or the chaotic implications that might come out of some of these policies?
Yes, but let me say this. I think the financial markets have done extremely well for one major reason, and that is we have a Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, who basically has promised he's going to keep interest rates close to zero for another 3 years. So if rates aren't going to move, maybe the 10-year rate will go up and down a little, but the federal funds rate is going to stay at zero for 3 years. So I think for people in the markets, that's a very, very important signal that no matter how rough things get with the economy, no matter how rough things might even get in the markets, you have a Fed chairman who will do everything he can to keep the markets and the economy in good shape. And I have a lot of faith in him. I have a lot of friends. I know he's taking a chance on inflation, but for right now, he'd like some inflation. He'd like more inflation. He worries about deflation. So I think that Jerome Powell makes a tremendous difference for the markets. And the people in the markets say, the way Powell is with yields being so low, the stock market is basically the only game in town.
So that reinforces the concept of don't fighting the Fed.
Exactly. Exactement.
Merci.
One last question, Greg. Your personal thoughts on the upcoming November election. Has this been, in your opinion, one of the most hyped, the most anticipated elections that we've seen in our generation? How do you feel about that?
I feel nervous for this reason. I think there's a decent possibility that we will have a disputed election, as I mentioned earlier. Two things that I really worry about. Number, I don't think we're going to know the winner the night of the election. It could take days, maybe even weeks before we know, because all of these absentee ballots, an enormous amount of absentee ballots, will have to be counted by hand. It could take weeks before we get all of that done. The second reason why I'm nervous, the more important one, let's say that Donald Trump, it looks like Donald Trump lost the election by half a point. Maybe he loses by half a point in Pennsylvania, half a point in Arizona, and he loses in the Electoral College. He has made it clear that he will go to the courts and say that he was cheated. He's been saying it will be a fraud. The absentee ballots are not honest. And knowing how much Donald Trump loves to sue people, I think he'll go to his attorney general, Mr. Barr, and say, I want you to take this to the Supreme Court. And I should point out, we've done this before in the year 2000. And in the year 2000, it took the Supreme Court until December 12th before they decided that George W. Bush actually did beat Al Gore. So we could go from November 3rd to mid to late December, at Christmas time, before we know who won. So that makes me nervous, because I think that would not be a very happy time for the markets. I think the markets would be very uncertain during that period.
And to wrap up on that, if that would occur, and you mentioned earlier the swing states, but if the swing states really came in and actually pushed Biden into a winning position, would he be able to contest or not?
No, the premise here is that Trump would narrowly lose, and he's made it clear if he narrowly loses, he will appeal. You know, if Biden wins easily, well, that's different. Then I think the country would be very happy not to see this go to the courts like it did in the year 2000. But you would have to accept the premise that Biden wins dramatically. I think Biden's going to win, but he's not going to win in a landslide. I think it's going to be close.
Greg, I'd like to squeeze in one more question just came in.
Please.
And the question is, how or who could get China to understand that both US and China have a lot to lose in the long run if they don't stop this war on mutual retaliation?
That's exactly my argument. I've been making the argument that both countries should be pragmatic. Both countries it's in their best interest for the US and China to get along. That's the two biggest economies in the world. I think that, you know, China has done some industrial espionage. I understand that. But I think that provoking China, Donald Trump, relations between the US and China are much worse now than they were 4 years ago. And I think Biden knows this. And I think that Biden, it won't be immediate. It won't be right away in January. But I think Biden will pick up the phone and he'll call Trudeau, Macron, Angela Merkel, maybe Putin, but Xi as well. Because I think Biden realizes that he has to repair the relationship between the U.S. and these countries, a relationship it's crazy to have the relationships this bad. And I think Biden knows that, and I think he will immediately try to make things better.
Thank you, Greg. Nick, that's pretty much it for the questions. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Rachid. Greg, I'd like to say thank you from all of us here from Montreal, Quebec. Really, thank you for your time this afternoon. And we picked probably the best day to actually have this, luncheon today.
Right.
Timing is everything in life. And I guess, we're doing right on our side. And thank you very much for your generous time and for answering all of our questions. On our side of the border, I can tell you that we are nervous with what's going south of the border right now. So yes, thank you very much for your time. De notre côté, je voudrais remercier tous nos clients et les amis de nos clients qui sont joints à nous. On n'anticipait pas d'avoir autant d'engouement aujourd'hui. On avait un certain nombre de personnes et on a doublé en réalité, quasiment triplé le nombre de personnes qui sont joints à nous aujourd'hui. Ça veut dire que ça démontre à quel point on est tous curieux de savoir qu'est-ce qui va se passer le 3 novembre et l'effet qu'il va avoir malheureusement ou heureusement sur les marchés. Juste pour vous rassurer d'une chose, mon équipe et moi, à tous les jours, on est constamment devant nos écrans en train de travailler et s'assurer de protéger le capital. On a évité une débarque totale au mois de mars et au printemps. On est déjà prêt pour la deuxième vague, autant pour la pandémie, autant pour potentiellement une deuxième vague sur les marchés pour s'assurer de protéger votre capital et s'assurer qu'on a une vision long terme. Mais comme vous pouvez voir, à tous les jours, les nouvelles changent. Je voudrais juste vous rassurer, on est là pour vous. Si vous avez des questions supplémentaires ou vous avez juste des inquiétudes ou des questions juste sur les marchés, n'hésitez pas de me contacter directement ou mon équipe. Ça va nous faire un plaisir de vous aider. Merci beaucoup, Ashley. Merci, Greg.
Et bonne santé.
Merci, Greg. Have a nice day. Good luck.
Au revoir. Vous aussi.
Merci. Merci
Bye.
beaucoup, Achille. Merci à l'équipe de chez AGF. Vous êtes des partenaires d'affaires exceptionnels. Ça fait 18 ans qu'on travaille ensemble, Achille. Et je veux te remercier pour tout ce que tu m'as apporté et à mon équipe et moi. Et je vais faire un plaisir de continuer avec vous par en avant.